Wouldn't it be great if you could make $100 million a year for just playing a game? Professional athletes certainly think so, but are their salaries really proportionate to what they have to offer? Now, imagine this. What if sports teams disappeared from the face of the planet tomorrow? We would definitely mourn the entertainment loss, but I'm sure we could survive. The same can't be said about various other industries such as teaching, firefighting, and as is most relevant now, doctors. But does this mean that athletes are overpaid or are public servants just underpaid? Welcome to another episode of ABTV's remote Crossfire Debate, and today we will find out if professional athletes are overpaid or not. Joining us remotely, of course, we have James Lafferty, who thinks that their salaries are justified, and we have Joe Morrison, who thinks that athletes and professional athletes are overpaid. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Great. So before we start with the opening statements, I just want to pull out the first slide that we have. This is basically just salaries of players from 2017, 2018. So NBA average salary was $6.2 million. Highest paid player got $31 million. MLB average was $4.4 million. Highest paid was $32 million. NFL $2.1 million. Highest paid $31.25. And soccer salary was $4 million. And highest paid got $127 million. That's Lionel Messi. That's his total earnings, just to be clear here. Right, so these are the salaries right now we're talking about. With these numbers on screen, James, how can you justify that, given the circumstances, the salaries are justified?
You can't.
Well, thank you, Joe, for that. The way I look at it is if you look at most professions, not all, but most professions, the people at the top of their profession earn in the millions of dollars. The top authors do, the top artists do, the top musicians do, certainly the top business people do, the top doctors do. And so when you look across most professions, not all, but most, the top of the profession earns, and these professional athletes are the best at what they do. And the market forces, I believe in open market forces. The open market forces dictate that's their compensation. And so I don't believe they're overpaid. I think that when you reach the top of your world, and certainly a LeBron James or a Lionel Messi, they're at the top of their game, they're the best in the world at what they do, then their earnings should be commensurate with CEOs and with world leaders and with the best musicians and the best artists and the best of the various professions.
Right, but what exactly are they doing to be getting paid so much?
Well, it's not. I mean, what they're doing is they are performing a feat and task that, in many cases, these are incredible athletic performances, and it entertains people, it motivates people, it inspires entire children and entire nations. I mean, there's been a number of studies that have correlated the Brazilian economy to how the performance of the national football team does. China invested $68 billion in the 2008 Olympics simply to help bring China into the world stage. I mean, sports plays an undeniable role in nation building. Why do you think so many countries like Qatar, like other countries, are actually out now procuring athletes from other countries to win medals? Because they see sports as a way to build national pride. So we can say, well, this is stupid. They kick a ball or they shoot a basket or whatever, but people are willing to pay for it. This is the open market. People want to see the NBA. People want to go to the games. People want to see these stars. And so who are we to question whether that's a useful activity or not?
Right, understood. So I think I'm going to bring Joe in, and I'm pretty sure you are going to make use of the current circumstances we're in right now, where people are talking about how healthcare professionals, especially nurses, aren't really get paid enough because of a shortage in supply, etc. So, Joe, what are your opening statements for why you think that professional athletes are overpaid?
Well, I'll leave the doctors and nurses and, the fabulous job they're doing, considering what they get paid till later on, Trudy. But, just to come back on some of the things that James said there, he picked out LeBron James, he picked out Lionel Messi. These are two players who, correct, I totally agree, they're at the top of their game, but they're playing in a team sport. Now, if Lionel Messi was as good as people say he is, he would have carried Argentina to a World Cup victory. He didn't, because the team that was around him was just not good enough. So they're team sports. They cannot surely get this amount of money when they rely on team members to deliver, whether it be the entertainment or whether it be the results or whatever else you want to talk about. So you mentioned leaders being paid what they get paid. The President of the United States, James, gets $400,000, and every single day, and the Trump conversation is another conversation for another day, whether you love him or hate him. But for every single day, he is making life and death decisions, and he's making economic decisions. Whether you think they're good or bad, it doesn't matter. He is making every day for the salary 1 week of a Lionel Messi or a LeBron James or any of those others that you've mentioned. Now, you also picked out rock stars. The difference between sports stars, and that's what we're focusing on today, rock stars, if they don't sell the tickets to the concert, if they don't sell their CDs, actually, I'll take that back. I'm showing my age, aren't I? No one buys CDs nowadays. If they don't sell downloads, they simply don't get paid. Or they certainly don't get paid as much if they produce a bad album as if they produce a good album. The difference with sports stars is they are paid big bucks for no direct correlation of performance. I totally agree with your statement, which is they're paid on their performance, but there's no scientific correlation between what they're doing and what they're getting paid. It just doesn't connect.
So obviously that brings me where exactly the money is coming from, right? So just at the back of what you're saying, Joe, so most of the money obviously comes from ticket sales, merchandise, ad revenue, TV plays a huge role, of course, in all of this.
Just to stop you there, Trudy, TV is number one. In almost every major sport on the planet, 50%, sometimes a little bit higher, sometimes a little bit lower, depending on the sport, comes from TV revenues, not ticket sales, not the amount of people that are turning up to see Lionel Messi in the stadium. TV.
Right. So, you're saying that there isn't as much demand from the people, from the consumers, like the fans, as there is from the sponsors then?
Again, there's no scientific correlation. Now, the great thing is that as we're moving into the digital age, there's more and more data becoming available so we can see exactly how many people are watching. Now, just to put that in perspective, James didn't mention boxers, for example, a Floyd Mayweather or a Conor McGregor, Canelo. Now, these particular sports athletes, because we were focusing on a couple of big names that are involved in team sports, these athletes, quite often, their fights in particular are on pay-per-view. So if nobody's interested in that fighter, they don't buy the pay-per-view. So there is a direct correlation as to how popular and how important and how entertaining, to use that word, these particular athletes are. But when you're talking about the highest paid players or the highest paid athletes, you go down the top 10 list from last year, the majority, not all, I think it's 9 out of the 10, are team players.
Well, yeah, I want to go back on a couple of things that, I agree with a number of the points that Joe made, but I want to make a couple of comments. So, let's talk about the President of the United States. I think you have to look at the lifetime impact of these people's career choices. And I'll give you an example. Every president of the United States made $400,000 a year or less. You're right. But the minute they leave office, they sign 8-figure book deals. And, the highest paid speaker in the world today is Bill Clinton at $250,000 a speech, making 2 to 3 speeches a week. So, yes, while he was in office, he was at $400,000. But the end ticket of someone in that position is multiple millions, tens of millions of dollars of income directly linked to the fact that they were president of the United States. And so you look at it over time. Now, if I take, and I'm a little bit biased, Joe, because my athletes that I work with are Filipino national athletes. These guys get paid based upon their performance in a given meet called the Southeast Asian Games. If they get a good medal in the Southeast Asian Games, they get 2-year guaranteed salary. But if they have a bad day, their salary gets cut by 70% the next day. And I look at the brutality of this versus this is equivalent of me in my life in business. If I have a bad meeting, my boss says, we're cutting your pay 70%. That was a bad meeting. I mean, I was at the last Southeast Asia Games and our long jumper, the guy has 4 kids. He has a bad day. He's sick. He's vomiting. He comes in 5th place, no medal. His pay is cut 70% the next day. The guy was sitting on the track crying. And when I went to talk to him, he says, I don't even know how to feed my children. there's a brutality in sports. Athletes are done with their career by 30, 35 years old when the rest of us are just coming into our earning potential. They lose it. So I also look at the longevity of what they're doing, not just the short-term salary piece. And that's why I believe they are not overpaid, because they're all done. And I have many former professional athlete friends, NBA players who have called me asking for help and finding a job. They have they're 45 years old. Nobody cares about that they played in the All-Star game. They can't get a job. They can't feed their family. And so, look at these guys in the NFL who have CTE and brain damage. They paid an enormous price for playing 6 or 7 years of professional sports, albeit a high salary.
Isn't that a problem then? So there are certain players who are getting paid a really ridiculous amount of money, and then there are some players who, like you mentioned, they're struggling to make ends meet, etc. So isn't that a problem? Isn't that why we're talking about this whole wealth pool and where a redistribution needs to be done, where it's not that one person, especially in a team sport like Joe mentioned, is earning a lot of money and the other person is struggling?
Yeah, but Shruti, that's talking a whole different subject. I mean, this sounds a lot like a book written in 1843 by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels called the Communist Manifesto, which was about redistribution of wealth. I mean, I'm sorry, I believe in free market. If people don't like it, I have boycotted sports teams because I didn't like some of the athletes on the team. If you don't like it, don't go to their event, and they will feel it very quickly. Don't buy their tickets. But if they continue to draw interest.
Sorry to interrupt you. There's a direct correlation there. I totally agree with you. If you don't like that athlete, and you don't buy the ticket, you don't go to the event. But that's not what's happening. They're still getting, in Lionel Messi's case, €500,000 a week, irrespective of whether Barcelona win, lose, or draw. Now, if you want to pick one classic case, and obviously you're well-versed, James, in the American sports scene, Jamarcus Russell. Have you ever heard of him? Yeah. You'll have heard of him, James. The majority of people watching this will have never heard of him. He was the number 1 NFL draft. He got guaranteed $31 million out of a $68 million salary. I think it was 5 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, James. Now, and that guy disappeared after, what was it, 1 season? He's still not playing now. He disappeared, but he still got $31 million. Now, you're talking about players that are struggling, they have a short-lived career. There are so many professional athletes, James, around the world who are earning in just a few short years what you and I would earn over the course of a 20-year career. It just doesn't make sense to me.
I'm just going to move on to the point that you mentioned about this entire communism philosophy and the whole Karl Marx ideologies. The highest paid type of doctors average just over $500,000 per year. A GS-13 level astronaut makes roughly $107,000 per year. A lawyer with 11 plus year experience makes $170,000 per year. Now, James, I know you've been a teacher, you've been a coach, and now you're in business. Teachers get paid really well. They don't even reach the triple digits. They're in double digits in most of the cases, or even less sometimes. So there obviously is a problem here, right? So if we're talking about it as a wealth pool, do you not think a huge chunk is going to, well, the entertainers, if I can call them that, instead of the people who are in the front lines, who are saving lives, who are, especially with what's happening right now, the doctors who are saving lives and also putting their lives at risk?
Okay, two quick points. First, on the slide, I'm sorry, but there's some flaws in it because you have to look at people's total compensation. A dear friend of mine was on multiple shuttle missions. Yes, he was paid $106,000 or $105,000 a year, but he's now written 2 books and he's on the speaking circuit, and he is cashing in big time from having gone into space multiple times. And most of the astronauts in the NASA program know that there's a whole money train that comes afterwards. So that you have to also look at the earning over time, and that goes back to even the president point. The president of the U.S. goes on the speaking circuit and writes books the rest of their life and earns huge sums of money afterwards. That's all linked to having done that job. So I think we first of all have to look at that point. The second thing is I agree teachers are underpaid. I was a teacher. I left the teaching profession because I couldn't basically take care of my family the way I wanted to. I left teaching voluntarily. I think that the frontline workers are underpaid. The question is the solution to go and implement a wealth redistribution system, or is it simply to get our tax base right? And if we all value teachers, I'm prepared to pay more taxes to pay teachers more. But what I don't think I should do is indiscriminately go to an athlete who has worked hard, made it to the top of his profession, and say, you know what, we're going to cut your pay by 50% because we decided that you should give that money to someone else. I don't think that achieves anything whatsoever. So it's two separate debates. Are athletes paid too much? That's one debate. Are teachers and healthcare workers underpaid? If Joe's position is there, I agree with him because I think they're underpaid. It doesn't mean that you link the two together and you implement the Communist Manifesto.
Well, I was just going to say that, obviously we've brought in a bit of normality. And what I mean by that is regular people on the street, except for astronauts. Of course, they're pretty special. But regular people on the streets who are doing regular jobs, and you've just shown us, their remuneration as a result of that. My point is this: if you want to do the comparison with the average man or woman, if you look at it as a business perspective, and I can talk about football in particular because that's my particular industry, or soccer, James, as you call it, the average wage as a percentage of turnover in football in the UK is running around 60%. So of the total revenues of a football club, they're spending 60% on wages. Some are up as high as 80% and more. Some have got a order and they're down as low as 55%. But it's still over the halfway point. To put that in perspective, in the retail industry, wages, the company's wages as a percentage of turnover is kicking around the 20% mark. In the hospitality business, it's up to the 30% mark because obviously you need more waiters and waitresses, etc. So even from an emotional point of view, they're overpaid. And I've made my point clear and I've made my position clear on that. I'm talking about a business perspective. It is total and utter nonsense.
I'm sorry, Joe. Your figures sound right to me. I mean, my wages runs at around 19% of turnover. But I'm selling a product, I'm manufacturing things. If we go to the advertising business, all advertising agencies run their payrolls probably 70% of their sales because all they sell is people's time. All a football club sells, Joe, is humans on a field playing on a pitch playing football. You can't compare that to retail where they're procuring products and then putting those products on the shelf, selling. They've got to account for the cost of those products. They've got to account for depreciation of the building. They've got to account for all of their electricity and everything else. I disagree with you. I'm a CEO and I can tell you now, if the business model is only human based, you can absolutely support 60% because that's their product. My product is not that. My product is toilet paper. I sell toilet paper. I sell masks. I sell other things. So that's 50% of my cost is in that product. And then another 20 is in the people. That's the cost structure of FMCG. But a people business is very different. And there's nothing wrong with 60% in an industry that only sells human capital.
First, I think James is in the right business right now. He's selling toilet paper and masks. It's like the best business to be in right now. The NFL made roughly $16 billion in revenue in 2018, and the 20 Premier League member clubs received a total payout of $3 billion. My question to you, Joe, now is exactly what James mentioned. So if all of this money, if it doesn't go to the players, where exactly is it going to go? Where are all of these funds going to be used?
Well, they should be used first and foremost in infrastructure and the longevity of the business. Now, to put that in simple terms, Manchester United, $500 million in debt. Barcelona, depending on which figures you use, nearly $750 million in debt. Their stadiums are crumbling. They need investment in the stadiums and infrastructure. When you go and see any sports team that's relegated, what's the first thing they do? They fire backroom staff. They don't fire the players, they fire the backroom staff. Now, part of that is because of the ridiculous contracts that they're on. But the other part of it is that there's emotion in there from the owners in the hope that those players, that talent, will get them back up a league or a level. So, in my opinion, Yes, you need some investment in your actual playing squad because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are providing the entertainment, but there's no correlation. There's no direct scientific correlation between what they're doing and what they get paid. However, they need to be investing that money, not just in their own clubs, but in the sport in general for its longevity.
But would these clubs be making all of these money if not for the players? So imagine if a Lionel Messi...
They're not making money, Trudy. I've just told you that Barcelona, who last year was the richest sports team on the planet, they came top of the Forbes list, is it's nearly $750 million in debt. In debt. That debt needs service. They're spending millions every year on just paying the interest on the debt. The 16 billion, I think it was for the NFL, was it?
Yes.
And the 3 billion revenues for the Premier League. Again, I come back to what I said at the beginning. That money, or 50% of it, comes from television. And until now, where we're getting more data involved, there is no correlation. There's no evidence. The TV companies, they need it as part of their overall strategy. But they're not making money. The actual Premier League TV deal domestically in the UK went down in the last right cycle. It went down for the first time in its history.
Right, that's probably also because of the new streaming revolution that we've seen, right? Not a lot of people, there's a lot of cord cutting happening essentially. So couldn't that be one of the reasons for that?
Yeah, quite possibly. There are many, many reasons for it. But again, it comes back to wanting to watch that. And I just bring up again, the boxers or the UFC fighters, the pay-per-view. The pay-per-view, and coming back to what James said at the beginning about rock stars, the pay-per-view is a direct correlation about the popularity of an individual sports person or an individual sports team. Just like the album sales or the single sales of a rock star or the concert ticket sales is a direct correlation to the popularity of that singer or that band, that act.
Would you agree, James, about the scientific correlation that Joe has been talking about right from the beginning of this episode? Do you really think that there is no correlation in terms of what they're getting paid and what is being paid for their services?
In a specific point in time, I would agree with Joe, but over the passage of time, I don't agree, because eventually, if that player doesn't deliver and they don't play, okay, they get the big contract and they get paid once. But then if they don't deliver and if they don't win, they're out of the league and they don't get paid anything. And, even on the pay-per-view, it's not exactly true. Manny Pacquiao, Mayweather fight, which was the richest fight in history, they were both given guaranteed sums. And then they were given a share of pay-per-view. It's not like if nobody wanted to watch, they weren't getting paid. Pacquiao was guaranteed $30 million before that fight ever took place. And Mayweather got the 41 or the 42 million. That was guaranteed income. And then there was a share of pay-per-view. If they hit certain number of clicks and certain number of views, they got a kicker on top. But they still got a big payday. Nobody went in and said, if nobody watches, I don't get paid. That was not happening. And so I think you have to look at it over a time horizon and say that the great athletes that deliver keep getting paid, and those who don't have very short careers. And so it evens out over time.
We've seen that female sports, the demand for it, of course, there are exceptions like Serena Williams in tennis, etc. But when we're talking about NBA and soccer, there's more demand for the male-oriented, male-dominated sports, and there's not as much for female, which is a problem, which we're not getting into right now. But there's obviously more demand for the male sports, which is why you see an NBA salary to be much higher than a WNBA salary, for example. So isn't there a match coming? And just backing James's point.
Well, it's a tricky one. You take Ronda Rousey as a great example. There's a sport that you would probably say UFC fighting. You'd probably say is more of a male sport. The audience is probably male orientated. The sign-ups, the involvement, the industry itself is probably more male orientated. I don't know for a fact, but I would guess that's probably true. Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm is another one, but Ronda Rousey in particular was an absolute superstar for a period because of what she did. Now, she had the backing of the UFC as a machine to make sure that her profile and her success and the money that came with that followed. Now, what we're getting into is there an equal promotion of certain sports? Now, just to put that in perspective, this comes back to, again, television, and we could talk about the TV aspect all day, because it provides 50% of all of those numbers that you've brought up during the course of this conversation, Trudy. Television. During the Cricket World Cup last year in the UK, the average viewing figures on the main sports broadcaster Sky was 400,000 as they reached the final stages of the Cricket World Cup, and it was fabulous, the Cricket World Cup. The Women's World Cup, football, was on mainstream, free-to-air BBC, and they were averaging 5 million. So, are you saying to me that women's football is more popular than men's cricket? Well, of course not. What you're saying to me is, or what that illustrates, is that the platforms and the promotion, because it was free to air, did a lot more good for women's football than being on a pay-per-view channel or a closed paid channel sports broadcaster.
Well, that is just smart business according to me. But now, since we're running short on time, I need to bring the conversation to this region and to the GCC. Bahrain made headlines by winning gold and silver medals when Ruth Jewett came second in the 3,000 meter race, and Eunice Kerwa came second in the marathon. So these are again players that have represented Kenya in the past. The second point is the UAE won its second Olympic medal ever by a Moldovan-born Sergiu Toma in judo. So GCC has had a reputation of, if I may say, buying players in the past. So that just brings a lot of questions right now in terms of, is this morally, ethically right? And why exactly are players really getting into the business? Is it for the spirit or is it purely for the money? James, I'll start with you.
Well, I know of a number of athletes, both from West Africa and East Africa, who have changed nationalities. And let's face it, when they ran for their home countries, they were earning very low wages. And so when someone else comes along and says, hey, we can nationalize you and we can guarantee you this income, I mean, these people are making choices for their families. If you look at most of the Kenyan marathoners, I mean, why do they go harder for the New York Marathon than the Olympic Games? Because the New York Marathon pays bonuses and pays for the winners. The Olympic Games, you get a medal. So, it is an economic choice. It's a slippery slope, because obviously even in the Philippines, there are a number of they don't nationalize people, but what they do is if you have a part Filipino heritage, they will give you a Philippine passport. And so there's a number of Phil-Ams, Filipino Americans, who've now started playing for the Philippines in sports, and they have a linkage to a grandparent or to a single parent. It's a slippery slope. I think as long as countries are committed to developing their own talent and they have grassroots systems, I'm okay with the transfer of people from place to place, depending upon their personal circumstances and their cultural heritage. But to basically neglect your own development programs and only buy athletes, I think that becomes a bit more questionable.
Yeah, so that's what I wanted to get at. Is this a case of lack of talent versus lots of money at disposal? So shouldn't they be investing all of that money in either harboring the talent that they have in their own country, or investing in sports in general, or redistributing the wealth, as we've discussed before, instead of buying athletes from other countries?
Yeah, I mean, a number of years ago, I went to the south of the Philippines, to one of the southern islands, and there was a little 5K race. And, we got all these kids to enter, and these kids were running, and they were running in bare feet, and they were running in flip-flops. And I must have seen 3 or 4 kids who as a coach, I was salivating. And I was saying, my God, if I could get that kid, this kid has more talent. In Morocco, I played a bit of low-level professional basketball. I remember we had a guy on our team that used to jump from before the foul line and slam dunk. I mean, the guy had like a 45-inch vertical. But nobody ever heard of him because he was playing in Morocco and he hadn't had the skills developed. I think all countries in the world, certainly the UAE and all of the countries in the GCC, there's amazing talent in their country. Now you have to put programs in place to tap into that talent and to bring that talent to the forefront.
One final question to the two of you all, which is, at this point, do you think the business of sport needs to be as big as it is right now? Joe, I'll start with you.
Yes. I don't think there's anything wrong with the business of sport. The current, what's the word? The current way the business of sport has developed over time. And you've got to remember, the business of sport is relatively new. you talk about business in general. Companies have been going hundreds of years. The business of sport, and I'm talking about big money involved, not only in the talent that's on the field, but in everything else. You go back just 20, 30 years to football and marketing departments in clubs. There was no such thing as a marketing department in a football club or a commercial unit in a football club. There was no such thing as global sponsorship of football teams in the 1980s and 1970s. Even the 1990s, most sponsorship came from the local car dealer or the like. So the business of sport has developed, and it's developed very, very quickly over a short period of time. And that needs looked at because it is such big money now. We obviously, and myself, being in lockdown, the football leagues are suspended. Everyone's asking me, the season's going to be cancelled? And I keep saying, no, they won't be cancelled. They will have to be finished in some way, shape or form. The reason being that if they cancelled the season, you're opened up to multi-million-dollar lawsuits for the amount of revenues, the business, that would be lost as a result of that. Now, if this had happened 30 years ago, my answer would be completely different.
James, same question to you. Thanks for that, Joe. Do you think it is and it should be as large as it is right now?
I agree with Joe. I mean, the consumers have established that. It wasn't some artificial force. We all want sports. And I have to admit, this is the first time in my life where there's been like a complete dearth of sports, and I miss it horribly. And, I keep going to ESPN.com and rereading old stories of former athletes because there's nothing else to read. I mean, no one is playing in anything. So, and I think
Tyson fights, James. Mike Tyson fights in the 1980s. That's what I'm doing.
Wow. Well, when this thing's over, you're going to see a return to sports, and you're going to see people celebrating and cheering just to be there to watch two teams play on the pitch. And I don't even think people are going to care who wins and loses because we all miss it. And it's a part of our society. And we get entertainment, we get joy, we get inspiration from sports. It can be as big as it is today, and there's no problem.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us here, James and Joe. It was a very insightful conversation. I don't know much about sports, but this has taught me something, and I'm not sure which side I agree to at this point, and we can't really ask our audience here. But let me ask you, Joe, has James convinced you with the arguments that he's made today?
Nope.
How about you, James? Has Joe convinced you at all?
No, not at all. I'm still where I stand.
Great.
Where do you stand?
I think they are open. I think athletes are open. Yeah.
You think they're overpaid?
Yeah, because I'm not very emotionally attached to the game, and I think emotional attachment has a lot to do with what you feel as well. So that's where
Did my argument convince you?
Sorry?
Did my argument convince you of that?
No, not really. I'm neutral in terms of the argument. Let me just be the moderator here and not say who won or who lost. But thanks again for joining us, and thank you to all our viewers for tuning in. This was our first remote ABTV's Crossfire Debate. I hope you had fun, and we will be back again next week.